All right, hello and welcome to episode 18 of Dano Says So. Tonight's guest has been patient enough to sit back down with me after he and I taped one, had current events and every other thing you could think of, sort of glitch that up and force us to redo it. Spencer Ackerman is a national security journalist whose time on the beat has taken him to Afghanistan, Iraq, Guantanamo Bay. He's done time at Wired, The Guardian. He's currently at the Daily Beast. In 2014, he was part of a team covering Snowden and covering warrantless gathering of information by the NSA. Spencer Ackerman, thank you for doing this.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Dan.
Absolutely. Now that we've sat there and we've done the inventory of your journalistic laurels, you are one of these guests that has the common thread that at least 90% of my people do. You are a punk rocker, sir.
I did my time.
Did your time. Were you a musician?
I was an unaccomplished drummer.
Okay.
But it doesn't matter. Like I had a lot of fun playing with like bands made up with people who are still like some of the closest people in my life. And so you would not have heard of any music that we made, like especially the further away you are from the New York City area.
I think one of the great tortures in life is when somebody not connected to your life and music asks you for details of it, and you know you're going to be rifling off things that are going to be met with a blank stare, you know? So I won't drive that particular nail through your foot.
You don't have this burden, Dan, given that you were in bands that people cared about.
Well, to you and I, to a couple of hardcore kids, but out in the big world, that's microscopic. You know?
No, but yes, at most, dozens of people reluctantly watched me play. Thousands of people enthusiastically both watch and reminisce about you.
Well, I am going to disappoint your dozens by not doing much drill down on music. And a thing that I know from past conversations is that you were part of the goings on at ABC No Rio, that you were a frequenter of that club. There's a value system and an ethos that ran through that. Do you think that's played a role in journalism for you?
Absolutely, however much I fell short of it. Nevertheless, like I wouldn't be a journalist without my time in punk rock. It was never something that I thought I could do. It was never something I set out to do. It was never something I gave any consideration to at all until friends of mine in punk rock started making zines and letting me write for them. And then I did, one issue, never to be repeated, of my own, but I was super obsessive about that one issue. And that got good enough feedback to make me think, like, people who are telling me that I can tell a good story might be onto something. And literally because of an alt weekly in New York that someone I knew from punk rock wrote for, I started reading that paper really obsessively. It was called New York Press. Lots of things about it are deeply fucked up. Its legacy is messy. But I basically got as obsessed about that paper as I did about punk rock, and like essentially refused to take their "no, you can't intern for us" for an answer until I like found a mutual friend who let me open her mail when she was the listings editor there, and then just started doing whatever else they would let me do until eventually they like let me write a couple pieces for them, and it was sort of, my course was kind of set from there.
Okay. One thing I know is that you had no formal education in journalism, correct?
That's right.
This was at all steps in the ladder, this was a feel your way through it and fake it till you make it type thing? Or did you sort of self-educate and do your own research? I mean, I'll tell you where I'm going with that is I used to do a little bit of freelance work.
Yeah, okay.
And somebody basically clubbed me over the head with the AP style book, which I had never even heard of before they did so. So, I mean, there are tricks of the trade that if you go in blind can bite you on the neck. If you.
Yeah, I can truthfully say I didn't know what I was doing, but that also meant it didn't occur to me that I couldn't do it or that I needed a journalism degree to learn how to do it. I just started out like copying people at New York Press whose styles I liked and saw what they were interested in, and that turned me on to stuff. And so I tried to sort of take something of a pastiche of the way I wrote and the way they wrote and started experimenting with that. And then, you know, the most important thing you can do in journalism is one of the most, I think, you know, difficult things to do in life, which is like really listen to people, as well as kind of conquer your anxiety about talking to strangers. And then eventually, as you know, you go on, you have to sort of force yourself to be, you know, more and more impolite with demanding people tell you things in some cases. And punk rock is very good practice for that. But, you know, it was probably not going to be in the cards for me to go to graduate school, and particularly graduate school for journalism. And that's a whole, you know, complicated thing also, because it's easier for me to not do that because I'm white. Lots of really exceptional non-white journalists, and especially Black journalists, need to go to, you know, certain graduate programs in order to compensate for an entire industry that's just not inclined to take them seriously, or at least as seriously as the median white applicant for a job. So you'll find, you know, as just part of like the general experience of being Black in America, where people have to work, you know, twice as hard to get as far. And, you know, that is the other side of, you know, graduate school. And I bring that up just to not give an impression that like, oh no, you don't need graduate school at all. Like there are complicated circumstances out there that don't necessarily have to do with money, but do have everything to do with racial caste and who gets access to what.
Well, what it does for me in hearing you say that, and that's not something that's come up between you and I before, is it exposes me to my own sort of naive romanticism about journalism. Because I would sit there and I would think, if there is one field where almost as a means of proving themselves objective and, for lack of a cheesier term, woke, that there would be sort of an unspoken wide open door policy for people of color. That's naive of me, you know, and I'm glad you raised that subject.
No, okay, so you raise an interesting point there. Everything fucked up about the world is reflected in journalism.
Okay.
It is not by any means an equal field. It is, you know, the longer I'm in this business, the more disillusioned with it I get. But no, it's kind of a process of like starting out by telling yourself, like, no, you know, Chomsky isn't right. This isn't all consent manufacture anyway. Mm-hmm. And then as you like get as far like into this stuff, I've been doing this for 20 years. There's a part of me that's like, no, he really had a point there, and it's fucked up to be part of this thing. The positive side of it is, compared to other professions, mm-hmm. It is much easier to get in. The difficulty, meaning like you don't have to necessarily specialize in it. The difficulty there is it is very hard, especially since I started out doing this, given that it's an entirely different journalistic landscape and economic landscape over the last 20 years, that it is still not easy, certainly not as easy as it was to get in, but very difficult after the first like rung or twos to progress beyond that. And that's exceptionally challenging. That's really a difficult thing. That's a failure of the industry. And that's something that, in my opinion, not enough attention is paid to tackling it. We're, you know, in similar ways to the way the outside world generally is cracking up, like a lot of those, in particular, economic fractures are reflected very seriously in journalism, where increasingly there is just sort of an ocean of fewer and fewer islands that are big enough to hire people to do substantive, thorough, meaningful journalism, and then everything else you just sort of see, the waters rise, and you wonder at what point you're going to be out of dry land.
Interesting. My education never stops doing these. Talk to smart people, learn smart things. One of my favorite things about the last time you and I talked was I shared with you content from an old interview I did with an old friend, AC Thompson from ProPublica. And first off, I love that I caught you off guard with exactly how dirty a punk rocker he is, and the fact that he was an Avail roadie and everything else. But for me, the real meat on the bone of that conversation was that I told you, he disclosed to me that one of the most toxic things in journalism was to have an agenda. And then one of the hardest things for him was to learn to operate without an agenda. You came back with arguably an opposite perspective about journalistic neutralism or journalistic integrity. Would you share that?
Yeah,
Not integrity, journalistic neutrality.
Yes, but integrity is really the key here. First off, it really did blow my mind that AC was a scene kid. For those who are not, people who follow bylines in journalism, AC Thompson is a tremendous investigative reporter. Most recently, he did pioneering work exposing the military, and in particular Marine Corps connections to the leaders of the fascist group Atomwaffen. But I do disagree with his perspective there. I don't think journalistic neutrality is either possible nor desirable. I think I am derelict to you, the reader, if I conceal where I'm coming from. And even if I tried to do that, I would fail at it, because you would be able to see where I'm coming from by reading the stories that I choose to report and paying attention to what I highlight. And, if you would, for those of you who would ask yourselves these things, you would notice what I don't highlight. Or
your focus becomes editorial in and of itself.
That's right. When you make these choices, you are, inescapably showing subjectivity. I think there's nothing wrong with that. Our business reflected, as it always does, the consensus of the times and dominant social and economic agendas of the people who run the business. And for a very long time, those high bourgeois elements, particularly after the Cold War, after the Second World War and through the Cold War, the 40s, 50s, and 60s especially, created, when it professionalized journalism and took it from a trade to a profession, this idea of the view from nowhere, so-called journalistic objectivity. The idea ultimately degenerates into a really dangerous and I think toxic environment where you can show what everyone's perspective is, but you can't demonstrate to a reader what's true. And that is ultimately, has a bill that's coming due in the way that everyone, for reasons, good and bad, hates the media and hates journalists. On the right, you get mad at the euphemisms and the evasions, as well as what you consider a uniform point of view, to have a kind of bourgeois liberalism recapitulate itself to you and tell you that's sort of the only reality out there. There's a point to that. It's a Chomskyan point, which is something that I've yet to find a conservative critic of the media take seriously, but nevertheless. And then, beyond that, you really just stop yourself when you report stories that you believe are crucial at the point, like really at the water's edge of saying what reality is. And the flip side to that, the flip side to the alternative I'm spelling out, is that you really have to do what I mentioned earlier, which is listen to people who do not have perspectives, do not have backgrounds, and do not have experiences that you share or even necessarily understand. You have to go further if you are, doing journalism that rejects objectivity in the direction of rigor and in the direction of balance. And you need to police yourself as you do that, just as other readers will give you their feedback, and that will police you. And you have, I think, a greater responsibility to listen and second guess yourself and ask yourself, do a tear down of stories after you publish them, particularly after an appropriate period of time has passed, and ask did I really capture that? Did I not? What did I miss? I think the way that mainstream media operates makes it a lot easier to avoid the responsibility of making the critical choices in both rigor and in presentation when it comes to covering these stories. And now you're in a situation where, for a variety of factors, to include a dominant mode of media narrative that I've discussed, just being so widely distrusted that we're in danger of losing a shared reality, which fundamentally is a perceptual issue rather than an objective fact about the world.
Right. Heavy, ugly food for thought there.
And just to be clear, I don't think that perspective is the only way of doing journalism. I just want to defend it as a legitimate way of doing journalism amongst many others. There shouldn't be one way of doing this.
I was thrilled to have you put it out there the last time we spoke, and I wasn't going to let you get away tonight without expanding on it. I want to get into a few specific stories of yours and spend a little time on them, and then I want to discuss a little bit about what you have coming up in the future. But before that, I want you to share with my viewers, listeners, whatever they are, the tattoo story you shared with me.
Okay, so in 2008, no, I'm wrong, pardon me. In 2007, I was doing an embed in Iraq, and I flew to Baghdad, and at the time in the Green Zone, the U.S. Military Command's press office, which was enormous, had essentially a small dormitory of basically just like a big room with a bunch of cots for journalists who were sort of coming in, going out to and from embeds or elsewhere in Iraq to essentially crash. And part of that meant, from, in this room with reporters from all over the world, you're going to be undressing in front of a lot of strange people, and so it goes. And one day when I did that, one of the other reporters, who it turned out was from Sweden, saw that across my shoulder blades, I have a refused quote from Rather Be Dead. The line is, "But I'd rather be alive." And I have not to that point, found someone from outside of punk rock who got that reference. So it was deeply weird to have a woman come up to me after I got changed from out of the shower and say "Excuse me, is that a refused lyric on your back?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Would it be possible to interview you for a story? It's weird running into someone from America who likes refused in the middle of Baghdad." So we did that, and that was weird. And then a couple years later, when I was in an austere part of eastern Afghanistan with a cavalry troop, I was in the shower, and another guy, shout to Ryan, came up to me and asked me about the tattoo, and then showed me that on his leg, I think it was, he has a much better refused tattoo. He has the original refused logo, which was a fucking rad thing to see. Punk rock is universal, and it will show up for you in the weirdest places.
I would say those are amongst the weirdest. I do not have a comparable experience. Okay, let's get into the story that we talked about in the past. We're revisiting a lot of things because they so impressed me, I would not want them to reach people who are kind enough to listen to us. The story while you were at Wired about anti-Islamic bias in the FBI, can you share that with everybody?
Yeah, thanks very much for asking about that story. I think it's important, and it sort of helps explain the atmosphere that got us to today. So in 2011, I did a story about a Freedom of Information Act request showing that an FBI counterterrorism training included some like pretty blatantly racist material about Islam, calling Muslims like 17th century savages, things like, I'm sorry, 7th century savages, things like that. I brought this up to the FBI and they said, those are, old documents. This is old news. We've already dealt with that. After I did that story, people who were upset by that description from the FBI and who happened to know that the FBI was lying to me provided me with documents showing a counterterrorism training that had recently gotten underway that was even more Islamophobic than that. And this was a training for junior agents at the beginnings of their career. What it was saying was that there was less of a problem with Al-Qaeda in the United States than with, and I quote, mainstream Muslims. That what the FBI, the premier federal law enforcement agency with tremendous power to spy on you and lock you up, was instructing their agents that whatever manifested, terrorism was going to happen in the United States started from the wellspring of a religion practiced by millions of Americans. And as this, went on, I brought this to the FBI. They got very embarrassed by this and started trying to say that, they were on top of this, they were handling this, the class was just a one-time thing. And then through further research and further leaks, the story just got bigger and bigger as it showed, like, no, there's all of this anti-Muslim material within the FBI, deeply inflammatory stuff saying that the ultimate objective of Islam was conquest and genocide. One from an FBI agent who, as far as I know, is still there, an analyst who has still not been reprimanded from this. His name is William Gothrop, and he's from Texas, talking about Islam as the Death Star, really just fucked up stuff. And it prompted what in some right-wing corners is still an infamous moment. I was later told by one of the leading Islamophobes in the United States, an asshole named Robert Spencer, that I was responsible for the Boston Marathon bombing because my reporting contributed to the Obama administration ordering this shit taken out of the FBI.
I did not know about this facet.
Yeah. In fact, this person who dared to say that I bore responsibility for the Boston Marathon bombing is cited more. His work cited more than 60 times in the manifesto of Anders Breivik, who murdered children in Norway. Anyway.
Heady stuff. Let's move on to the Pulitzer moment, but more so, really, I think you'll end up editorializing if I just kind of turn you loose on Snowden and on the NSA, which is what I would like.
Yes, well, so basically, I had a bit part in the Snowden story. I was the newly hired national security editor for The Guardian. It was a fancy title. It just meant I was a national security reporter. Why
would you disclose that?
Again, this is one of those things in journalism where, like, lots of shit is just entirely made up. What counts as editors in different places is not a standardized thing. Everyone is just basically flying blind in a lot of really important respects. Everywhere you work, like, seems like a fanzine. Like, nothing seems professional. Everything seems crazy, even if you're working at, a global news outlet like The
Right.
Guardian. I had just started. I got there. They asked me if I could move my hire date up slightly so I could, as they put it, come to an extra orientation. I thought, like, okay, the British are, really bureaucratic, I guess, so I'll do that. And in fact, it was
Mhm.
cover to let me know that an extraordinary thing had happened, thanks to Laura Poitras, Glenn Greenwald. Glenn was at the time a columnist for The Guardian. We had the most significant leak in the history of the NSA. This was the stories that in 2013 and 14 ended up exposing not just warrantless surveillance on Americans, but the shape of the elephant in terms of the global dragnet for surveillance that the NSA constructed after 9/11. And it filled in crucial gaps in our knowledge, particularly about the interplay between the NSA, American empire, and what the Harvard Business School professor emerita, Shoshana Zuboff, calls surveillance capitalism, the current dominant economic model of essentially how to commodify and monetize the data that you and I are pushed into producing as sort of the cost of living in the 20th century to include this very moment. So we learned a tremendous amount about how, in practice, the NSA collects pretty much every electronic signal that it can find a legal rationale to collect, and regardless of how constitutional that is or is not, and usually is not, regardless of the legal and political, in particular legislative and judicial constraints that people thought the NSA was operating under, it turns out that in an environment of deep secrecy and supreme technological capability and esoteric knowledge, the NSA will decide for itself what its boundaries are. So that was, in a nutshell, what the Snowden story is about. To put it as simply as possible, the NSA has, along with surveillance capitalism, put us in a circumstance in which privacy is increasingly theoretical.
Does knowing that, does seeing the great and powerful laws behind the curtain create a certain wariness or a different type of caution in the life of a reporter that maybe you didn't exercise beforehand?
Yes, absolutely. It taught me that I really didn't understand just how insecure my data was, how insecure my communications with sources who I had sworn to protect, in fact, was, and how if I did not change the way I operated, there was no guarantee that all of my information, all of my confidential conversations could be discovered, weaponized, used against the people who had tried to provide me with information to tell the public what they thought the public desperately needed to know. And so that just becomes kind of a constant struggle and what I would consider a useful paranoia.
It seems to me that making a career out of your particular sphere of focus, your area of expertise or effort, couldn't help but breed kind of a constantly looking over your shoulder type personality. Is that true? Or have you been able to escape that?
No. Other people are going to be able to escape that, but not me. I've never understood how, like, when Siegel and Schuster came up with Superman, they decided that a reporter would be mild-mannered. I know some. I don't know many. The best reporters I know are absolute neurotics. People who suffer from manic depression.
Mhm.
People who are trying to take control of their lives with the existential anxiety of how weighty that in fact is. A lot of people who I know from journalism have to some degree or other intersected with punk rock. There are scene kids out there who do this, and that's always cool to see. Others have enough of a conversant relationship with punk rock that that's still fun. But yeah, always looking over your shoulder. If I publish something overnight, like if I wrap something and I know it's going to publish in the morning or a couple days from now, those are going to be sleepless nights for me until that publishes. I've been doing this for 20 years, and that happens every single time. And I am by no means the only reporter who experiences that. Early on, someone who had been very generous to me, named John D. Judas, shared. He was in his 60s when I started doing this, and he let me know after we shared a byline once. I was 23, and I told him how like freaked out I was getting because like this was one of my first, if not my actual first, cover story, and I was just like shitting bricks that I had gotten something wrong and didn't realize it, or there was something I wasn't properly either apprehending or presenting right. And he told me, and I remember this to this day, that if I was going to be a journalist and I was going to last in this business, I was going to have to learn to live with a certain low-grade anxiety.
Wow.
And I think he and I have a different understanding of what low grade means. So yeah.
Listen, I think one of the big glaring flaws in my interviewing style is if a person gives me an in to just explore the psychobabble and peel away their forehead and look at how their brain works.
Go ahead.
I'll go all the way down that, but I don't want to do that. And I don't think this can be the last time I interview. I don't want to do that with the remainder of this because you, sir, are working on a book.
Yes, thank you very much for bringing that up.
Yeah, I would like you to spend some time on that before we get the hell out.
All right, thank you, Dan. If my, I said this the last time, but I'm going to say this. If my 17-year-old self could see me now, that's pretty amazing. Thank you very much for being interested in talking about my boring career at all.
That self-deprecation will serve you well, sir, but I think it's hogwash. Anyway, go on.
Anyway, next May, I'm going to publish a book called Reign of Terror. The book is going to be an extended narrative about how the war on terror and the politics that fueled the war, and that the war in turn unleashes and intensifies, becomes a big part of the story for how we get to the America we live in now, where we're going to have an election a few days after this airs, and many people in the national security world are expecting some degree of violence, are bracing for it. And in general, the story of how we get here, how we get to Donald Trump in particular, what Donald Trump is a symptom of and what Donald Trump exploits, is this attitude of fear and this circumstance of the increasing militarization of American life that occurs and intensifies in a context of a war the United States can never win nor get its way out of. And by never get its way out of, I don't mean that there's an impossibility about it. I mean that various political circumstances conspire to make politicians decide that the safest course of action is to continue the wars rather than end them, causing an enormous, enormous disconnect with not just the broader population of the United States, both left and right, who hate the wars, but intensify the broader geopolitical circumstances, essentially American empire, that make divesting yourself of an imperial position something that politicians try and avoid and fear doing in case they're demagogued for doing that. It is a toxic circumstance. It is one that keeps the United States murdering people around the globe, declaring that as an exclusively American prerogative, and bringing the United States into a circumstance where it invites not just terror attacks, but essentially the desecration of what it says are its ideals and the plunder of its wealth upward. So that's the book. We're going to be, over the course of 9 chapters, also talking about all of the relevant episodes in the War on Terror, all of the infamous moments from detention to torture to mass surveillance to outright war that sort of keep ratcheting in the direction of fascism.
Light, breezy stuff. Okay.
It is an uplifting book. It's going to be a holiday read going forward, a seasonal story that I think you're going to want to pass down to your children during tender moments. So
you walked right into something I couldn't decide if I was going to ask or not. Now I'm going to ask it. You are a family man, yeah?
I am, yes. I am at this point a daughter guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think is how to describe myself.
Okay, well, does that ever give you pause in your chosen career? The implications of your work ever make you think about the life at home and how you're impacting it? I don't understand things well enough to know if that's a dumb question. It just, at this level of elevation, it occurs.
It's not a dumb question at all.
Okay. We having a connectivity issue here?
Yeah, but I think it's resolved itself. Can you hear me?
All righty. So the family man question.
Yeah, no. In terms of safety during times when reporters are increasingly, under threat, I try and take, necessary precautions, including certain amounts of what I do and don't feel comfortable putting on the internet concerning my family, but also, recognizing that like this is a source of not just joy but motivation in my life. My daughter is deeply punk rock. She's very goth. She said the other day, and she is an amazing freestylist. She makes up songs. She will, if she stumbles over words, she'll just, make up enough essentially scratch vocal so she can continue the rhythm until she gets comfortable figuring out what she's going to say. And she said to her mother the other day that she wants to be a singer, but she doesn't want to be a rock star, and she's 5 years old.
The very goth, very punk rock, lyrically gifted 5-year-old. That may have something to do with why her father can speak ad infinitum. Yeah, I'm seeing a bloodline here. Well, listen, I like that as a note to wrap on, Spencer. I cannot thank you enough for your patience with this process. You know damn well I'm going to bug you again as current events inspire it. But for now, I'd like to say, everybody, that is episode 18 of Dano Says So. And Spencer Ackerman, thank you so much.
Dan, the pleasure's all mine. I can't believe I'm doing the Dan O'Mahony podcast. That is crazy. It's been an enormous, enormous thrill. So yeah, anytime, it would be my pleasure.
People are going to make fun of me for that, sir. Thank you. Doesn't mean I don't enjoy it. All right, take care, Spencer.
You too, Dan. See you.